doing, everyone? And welcome to Associations Creating Community. I'm Jeff Glassie, partner and co-chair of the association's nonprofits and political organizations law practice at Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston. Co-host today is my colleague, Mark Franco. Mark, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
And Sara Lake and Bill Ellis, and we'll introduce them a little more fully in a minute. And our topic today is maintaining community in certification organizations during a pandemic. A little bit of background. We have done some podcasts that were on site at ASAE's Great Ideas Conference for a few years. And we gave them the name Associations Creating Community, because as lawyers, we feel very much part of the associations, membership organizations, certification body, accreditation body, community. And we wanted to do something that we would be able to give back a little bit and have conversations that we felt that nonprofit organization executives would be interested in hearing about. And this really came from some conversations that I was fortunate to have with John Graham, who unfortunately passed away, as I think most of you know. He was president and CEO of ASAE, and he stressed to me a couple of times about the importance of community within associations, and it really struck me. So that's why we call us Associations Created Community. We were doing some podcasts. This is sort of our we're now doing these, we call them Zoom casts, but since we've gone through the pandemic and now we're in the Zoom age, this is a very familiar platform for people. So I'm very glad that you've joined in, and hopefully we're going to have some good things to talk about here. Mark, how'd you like to introduce Bill for everybody?
Sure, thanks. So, it's when Bill said that he was going to join us, I was really pleased, because not only is he a very well-respected individual within the credentialing community, but I've had the pleasure of knowing Bill now almost for 20 years. I can't believe it's been that long, Bill. But Bill, in some ways, can be credited for some of the success I've had in my own professional career, because Bill actually, he introduced me to my first job in the nonprofit world. And one thing that I bet you didn't know about Bill is that he's a very proficient martial artist. That's how he and I met. We actually met while we were training in Kung Fu over in Herndon. And so, Bill knows how to do the tiger claw. He knows how to use the broadsword and the staff, and he's not somebody that you would want to mess with, I think, in those ways. But, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to contravene anything that I said, but I just want to say thanks again for joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you.
So thanks, Mark. Those comments, and I appreciate that introduction, but I think it kind of speaks to this sense of community. The world is a small place, and, college kids play that game, so many degrees of Kevin Bacon. But I think that when we look at the world of associations, not-for-profit certification, there is only 1 or 2 degrees of separation from many of us. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed throughout my career, getting to know everyone on this call and many other people. Tell you a little bit about BPS. So the Board of Pharmacy Specialties is an autonomous division of the American Pharmacists Association. So we operate under the umbrella of an association. We do so autonomously to stay in line with NCCA standards and to make sure there's appropriate firewalls between our certification activity and the association membership. We have 50,000 certificates currently in 14 different specialties. So we've been growing. We've seen a lot of growth. So the final point that I'll make is, while we're, probably a medium-sized certification body that's been growing, one of the things that COVID, I think, has brought to light is just what is the true value of your certification, and if it can maintain you know, in this kind of environment where everything is challenged, you know, that's really the litmus test. And I think community is important. We have a little tagline that we use regarding we call them certificates. Our colleagues on the medical side call them diplomates. There's different things, but we talk about a community of professionals on the leading edge of patient care. So even though certification, I think in some ways, may be closer to licensure, there still is an opportunity to create a sense of community. And so I think it's important to take some time today and appreciate Mark and Jeff allowing some time for us to talk about that a little bit. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And then I have the great honor to introduce a good friend, really one of the stalwarts in the certification world. Both Bill and Sara have been in leadership positions at ICE, Institute for Credentialing Excellence, and NCCA, the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. And I've known Sara a long time, and I just really respect her for her diligence and her smartness, and she's just always been one of our favorite people to work with.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, we go way back, and I think it's also very interesting to note, as of course I'm the CEO of the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners. I've been there almost 10 years, but previously our quite visionary founder, Joanne Scott, who created the credentialing board in association with others 35 years ago, she presented with you, Jeff, on a number of occasions and worked with you. And so, yeah, the ties between our organization and you particularly, but also Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston go back a long ways. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization, where we are now after that founding 35 years ago. So we're a global organization, and the certification body numbers over 32,000 in 122 countries. IBLC is actually releasing its latest annual numbers here shortly. We will be announcing it, but as a bit of preview, our numbers actually did increase last year, despite all the challenges of 2020. So that's really great news. And it very much spotlights the importance of the work that our certificates do in terms of public health. It's very timely. The organization and the credential IBCLC is one of just a very few number of programs that have been continuously accredited by the NCCA since the late 1980s. And really the IBCLC just represents the gold standard in professional lactation care, and really very proud of all our certificates, many of whom are really working on the front lines during the global pandemic. So it's a real honor to represent and support them.
Thanks, Sara. So, to get into our topic, sounds like you had a pretty good year, but you've got a lot of people and the examinations to give and a pandemic, and what challenges maybe did you face, overcome, not overcome because of this pandemic, and how have they hopefully been able to, have you been able to maintain community in your constituency?
Yeah, it really was a challenge, and it can't be really overestimated. Obviously, we're fortunate this is the sole global pandemic in our lifetime, and hopefully it will be the last. But it certainly had an effect on us. We were getting ready to have our examination administration right when the World Health Organization announced a global pandemic. So we had to move very, very quickly, and it was very challenging. We had to reseat approximately the 1,500 people that were already seated. We postponed the exam, brought them to our September administration. So we offered the exam to over 5,000 people at that time. Our testing vendor, our computer-based testing vendor, was reseating about 450,000 people. So it was, really in a very compressed time frame. So it was very heavy lift on both sides. That having been said, the exam did proceed in September. We did avail ourselves, like many programs did, of live remote proctoring. something that we had not used previously. Typically, as you know, that was something more at the university level for sort of formative assessment rather than, for professional certification programs as a summative assessment. So the NCCA made that exception available, and we did avail ourselves of that to the extent that we could. We stood up a communication center, a COVID-19 resource center. Luckily, we had an offer on the table for a brand and communications manager. A big shout out to her. We wouldn't have been able to do it without her. She came aboard and we were able to push out a lot of good information. We had a special webinar for folks. Also in the communication vein, specifically referencing that community. The board chair, Norma Escobar, who really was a fabulous leader. She has just rolled over in her term, but she suggested that we put out a series of videos, and they were very inspiring, very uplifting. It was called the Resilience Series. And so the board, board members from diverse places and obviously diverse situations given the pandemic, what was going on in different parts of the world. So board members from Brazil, the UK, the UAE, really literally all over the world, put out a series of wonderful videos talking about how they were adapting to the pandemic, how they were working with patients, what had changed. It was very inspiring. And then we put out a call to our certificate community. And we received about 17 submissions back, and we put those together in a package. And I think it was very much appreciated by the community because we were, we knew that they had a number of challenges working on the front lines. And I think that that was really well received. And we expressed our appreciation for them, and they seem to receive this video series very well.
Wow, that's great. Video series. Bill, how about you? Same question, really.
So, like the rest of the world, I think we were all caught off guard. The key word for me, there's always a word of the year. For me, it was flexibility. So we had to be very flexible. We had to move things to a lot of virtual platforms. But the other word that comes into mind too is planning. So this is really kind of a surreal story. So in December of 2019, we have an emergency preparedness plan that we use through a company called PlanAware. It's not an endorsement of them. I'm sure there are many out there. But we went through a desktop emergency preparedness exercise, and eerily so, it was how would we handle a global pandemic? Now, wow. A lot of what happened there was not necessarily the same thing that played out, but it got us thinking about the what ifs. So we had already done some remote work and already utilized some of the virtual tools that were already available. Obviously, we had to go 100% remote and virtual for a period of time. But the fact that we had experimented with that and used that a little bit, I think made it a little bit easier, as opposed to, I know some organizations that just, had to do that for the very first time. That had to be extremely challenging. The other thing that Sara said that I think was critically important is communication. There was so much, and there still is so much unknown around this pandemic. I don't think you can over communicate. So we really tried to communicate clearly to folks about how we were going to test, when we were going to test. We too, just like Sara's group, moved to use live remote proctoring as an option. Interestingly enough, in our exam, only about 15% of the people in the States opted for that. Still, many prefer to go to a test center. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe there was lack of information about it, or maybe just with a, essentially a 5 or 6 hour high stakes exam, people preferred being away in a dedicated area. I'm not sure. The other lesson, one of the lessons that we learned too that was really important, is we had tested in Windows previously, and we still do test in Windows. But when an event happens, be it a pandemic or something else, sometimes it can threaten that window. So one of the things we have actively started discussing is moving away from Windows-based test administration to more of a continuous test administration, so that we might be able to have some flexibility, again, that word flexibility, around issues that may come up. So that's kind of where where we're at, how we sort of dealt with it, but there were a couple of lessons learned. We're thinking long and hard. Now it's easy for me to say we'll move from Windows-based to continuous testing. Our psychometrician colleagues that assure the rigor of the exam and the defensibility will tell you it's not quite that easy. You've got to do a lot of things with your item bank and how you construct your exams, which are all different. But you know, that's one of the silver linings to this cloud that's been the pandemic. I would venture to say, and we can all probably relate to this, if any of us had said to our respective organizations, say in January or February of 2020, we're going to do everything virtually next year, right? There probably would have been a riot and people would not have bought into that, but everybody did. So that's the good news, that it's this pandemic in a lot of ways has enabled us to jumpstart some things with a little bit more receptivity, at least open-mindedness than we might have normally had. So anyway, that's just some of my quick observations.
Cool. Mark, you want to jump in? Do you have any questions?
Sure, yeah. So this is for Bill and Sara. And Bill, I'll start with you. So both programs have generally been successful over the last few years. And I think we're looking, had very positive outlooks for the future. Can you sort of give your thoughts on what the pandemic has done to that and maybe how you might be thinking about your future now?
So I would say a couple of things. One, as I mentioned in my opening comments, this pandemic and this challenge has really forced everyone to think about the value of their certification. And we saw that there's still an appetite for people to obtain these advanced practice credentials to show their knowledge and their skills. So I think that's one of the things that has really played out. Our numbers were almost to what they were last year. So we were very close. So I think that, again, it gets to this value proposition of your credential as you move forward. And I think it behooves any program that offers these credentials to really think about what that value proposition is. So that's just some of my observations from our perspective, but we're optimistic about the future. And we just opened up in the States, our spring testing window, and our numbers are almost equal at this point this year as they were last year, which essentially was pre-pandemic. So again, I think it speaks to the value. The other final comment I'll make is that I think programs need to look long and hard about how they view and make changes to their eligibility and what all that means. Because we've heard a lot of programs say, well, we want to lower this bar or eliminate this because we need people. And again, I think you have to really look at what is your credential built to do? What does it tell the public? And therefore, what kind of changes do you make? What does that mean about that? But that's just some of my observations from our program that may not hold true with every program.
Yeah, Sara?
Sure. So we're very fortunate. I think a lot of our candidates and certificants are obviously very passionate about what they do. And, one of the silver linings, if one is going to have a global pandemic, it's certainly reignited a lot of people's interest in public health. I mean, we see how important that is. Breastfeeding is certainly one of the greatest things that you can do for public health. So I think that, that bodes well in terms of the future. Additionally, we also know it's true that, when there are some more challenging, financial and economic situations, people do seek to distinguish themselves in the marketplace. And so, in terms of credentialing, the economics of it are such that, if there are difficulties in the global environment, sometimes that spurs people to earn their credential. And that's obviously a very different model than the association model. That's sort of a different analysis. But in any event, people have been, very receptive and continue to pursue the credential. But we have also tried to make it, very, convenient for them in these very challenging circumstances. We very quickly stood up online continuing education opportunities to maintain the credential in a host of languages, all over the world. We made that available. We certainly re-emphasized that telehealth was permissible to see clients and patients. Additionally, we do have a clinical component towards eligibility. So we issued some interim guidance on that front that was in effect for 2020, most of 2020, as well as most of 2021, so that individuals can access their credential, mentorship, et cetera, irrespective of what's going on. And that's been a very interesting change, because I think historically people might look for a mentor, down the street or in your same town. But now you can work with a mentor, anywhere in the world. And so it's really kind of changed the dynamic quite a bit. And it's actually very interesting, and it's decreasing barriers and enhancing accessibility.
Well, that is really fascinating. It almost sounds, from what both of you are saying, that maybe some aspects of the community were enhanced by this. And going back to what Bill said on value, when we talk to folks about legal issues and certification, one of the things I like to mention is integrity, which is kind of not really a legal issue, but if the program doesn't have that integrity, sort of soup to nuts, top to bottom, that provides the value, people are not going to show up for the tests. And it sounds like it may be integrity. You had to try maybe harder to keep the same integrity with the exams and the communications and all that, but maybe that it was a plus, that you sharpened your game a little bit. Bill, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it forced everyone to be probably a little bit more focused, because our group, I'm sure like many healthcare groups, these practitioners were on the front lines having to do different things. So it forced us to quickly prioritize. For us, integrity of our examination process, rigor was really paramount. And I think a lot of our activities of our subject matter experts in 2020 really focused on how do we make sure that we maintain the rigor and the integrity of our exam process. So I think that some of those things really, forced us to focus, maybe even more so than we did before, on what is the most important thing, or what is the one thing that we really need to do to be successful to maintain our brand reputation and the integrity of the credential.
Yeah, thoughts on that, Sara, too? About, you were kind of indicating you've gone above and beyond in order to be able to communicate with the folks in your community.
Well, I think as Bill had said, which is an excellent point, it kind of makes you rethink things a little bit. What is regarded as, this is the way we do it, and it needs to stay that way. It's forced everyone to be more nimble, to be more creative, but while at the same time, keeping that integrity and that quality behind the credential. But that is a little bit of a challenge, right? And but yes, it has kept us on our toes, and in fact helped us to move forward, perhaps at a pace that we wouldn't have moved at before.
Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah, so unfortunately the pandemic has really reduced ways that organizations can create community, which is what we're talking about today. So is there anything that, Bill or Sara, is there anything that you're doing, especially because of the pandemic, to sort of keep that community going?
I think for us, one of the lessons learned when we talked to our subject matter experts, they really valued the face-to-face interaction that we had before. I think we all value that face-to-face interaction. We had heard that before that even came to light. One of the things that we did to try to maintain that sense of community is we really doubled down on saying thank you. And we put in place some different things to thank our volunteers so they did feel part of this community, because they were disconnected in a lot of ways. So that was probably the one big thing. So we did some extra thank yous this year in terms of some tangible things. We created a service medallion for the 2020 year. I think we may continue it every year, we'll see, but it was really as a tangible reminder as someone has that displayed on their desk or bookshelf of the effort they made and that we're thankful. We also expanded some of the recognition in how we award credits for our volunteers towards maintaining their credentials, and had a little bit of flexibility there. But I think, you know, and you learn this in fundraising, if you're in a, you know, a nonprofit, you can't say thank you enough. And that really kind of came home to me. It was important to keep people tied into the work that we're doing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Absolutely. And additionally, we're just, that was not something, you know, sometimes in credentialing, you kind of have your head down and you're meeting your deadlines and you're doing what you need to do. And we have increased our ways and have in process some of the ways to say thank you. But we are also, due to having this brand manager and being in this different environment, we are really focusing on spotlighting our volunteers, our emerging leaders, newer faces in the community, things of that nature, and telling their stories on our website. Because, you know, if we can't be at a meeting and, you know, over coffee and chat with people, or get to know new people, we want to continue to be able to connect. And so that's one way we're trying to do it within IBLC, and then, you know, share our new relationships externally with the community. And so people are getting to meet people in ways they perhaps, you know, wouldn't have if they hadn't run into someone at a conference that happens to be in Australia, but now they're meeting them.
Yeah, to tie in that communication and recognition theme, I got a report the other day. One of our most viewed social media articles was a blog post that was written that recognized the providers in the pandemic and thanked them. You know, there wasn't much content in there about how to get certified, but it really it reinforced to me that was the most popular, you know, article that was viewed. It had the most views out of anything that we did last year. So it kind of reinforces that sense of saying thank you and recognizing people for the work that they do.
Wow, you all have done so much, and it sounds like, you know, successfully. One more thing I'd just like to ask about, because, you know, part of our daily communities are the people we work with, you know, staff, and there's certainly many similarities between certification board organizations and staff, nonprofits typically, and, you know, employees. And what's changed and with the pandemic in terms of staff, and where do you think how will things be different even another year from now with both of your people that you work with in your offices?
Yeah, so Jeff, getting some feedback. We of course pivoted very quickly to all remote work. I mean, we are very fortunate because we were partially remote anyway, right? We have a presence outside of Brisbane, Australia, and outside of Vienna, Austria. We have staff in Georgia and California. So we were able to do that fairly readily. At the same time, it was very interesting. We'd always been partially remote, now being entirely remote. How relatively quickly we could do that and how relatively seamlessly. So one of the things we are looking at is potentially in the future reducing our footprint. Obviously, as part and parcel of that, one has to maintain, as you say, that sense of community, right, with the staff. And we've had, you know, we've tried to do various and sundry things, certain contests, et cetera. We, as a benefit and as a thank you for the staff that worked very hard reseating all those thousands of people and making all of that happen, we had some benefit options that they could choose from, and they were a little bit novel, things such as, you know, taking a class or a week of HelloFresh, or, you know, just to really say thank you, because, you know, this is the time that people really had to stand and deliver. You know, failure was not an option, and people did go the extra mile, and we certainly did want to recognize their great accomplishments and look at how we're doing business in the future. There's a lot of different opportunities, and we are carefully examining them, and it's quite likely we will not be doing business as we were doing it in the past for, you know, not just right now, but in the future.
Oh.
I think clearly there'll be a bigger virtual component to what we do, but it's important not to lose sight of that sort of human touch. One of the things that I've noticed, which has been great in this, is, many times pre-pandemic, people would say, well, how are you doing? And it was almost like a throwaway line. Now, I think there's a real meaning to that in terms of how people are doing. And I think it's important to business leaders to be genuine. So I know within our organization, each of our departments meet weekly. So there's a lot of touch base, and I, even departments that don't report to me, I try to reach out regularly and ask people how they are doing and how their families are doing and those kinds of things. I think it's important to be human and to be more connected in a human way. And maybe what happened before, not that there wasn't an interest in that or that people were inhuman in some ways, but you kind of took for granted the fact that when you saw someone and you were physically there. And at least for me, maybe we don't take that for granted as much now. And I hope that kind of continues as we go forward.
That's a great point. You're talking about gratitude for just what we have. That certainly, personally, for me, has been one of the biggest lessons of all this. Be able to be in a house and have food, and still be able to do our work, contribute to society. Gratitude, community, very important things, and we have a lot of gratitude for both of you for participating in this conversation. We'll put it out there and see what people think, but conversations about community within the association, a nonprofit organization, group of folks, I just think is really valuable and important. So thank you very much for participating.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to be here.
No, I appreciate it. I tell everyone, be positive, test negative.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. It's Associations Creating Community. Jeff Glassie here with Mark Franco, Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston. Appreciate your tuning in. Thank you.